Welcome to Refinery Injury Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the Refinery Injury Podcast with Brooks Harrison. Brooks is a Texas trial attorney dedicated to representing refinery and plant workers who suffer catastrophic injuries in explosions, fires, and chemical accidents across the South. I'm Shameika Rhymes, and today we're talking about toxic smoke, gas releases, and the kinds of inhalation injuries refinery workers don't often recognize until it's too late. Hi, Brooks.
Hi, Shameika. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. Well, Brooks, when a gas release or smoke event happens at a refinery, workers often don't see the danger right away. So what are the early signs that something just isn't right?
Pay utmost attention to faint or unusual smells, especially if it's a unit you've been in before. You should kind of know the smell of the unit. Obviously, have your sniffers, your detectors, wear those at all times. Notice eye or ear irritation. Throat, ear, and eye is oftentimes a big component of exposures. Obviously, dizziness, hissing sounds, because that would produce a potential exposure. And any visible haze is, especially when you're around hydrocarbons, is very important. And a lot of times people will brush off as just another refinery odor. But at the end of the day, those are your early warnings.
Different gases cause different reactions. So what kinds of substances do workers tend to be exposed to during these events? And how do the symptoms vary depending on what's in the air?
Some of the most common substances, gases that you're going to be dealing with at refineries are hydrogen sulfide, H2S, benzene, hydrocarbons of all sorts, and sulfur dioxide. And some will hit you with an instant irritation. You have an instant reaction. Others, like H2S, they just literally knock you down immediately. Others, it can be a kind of a progression of your symptoms. And a few damages of these gases will show up literally years later. So that's why it's always important to get checked whenever there's an exposure. Whenever you're being offered medical care, take it.
Well, you just mentioned that sometimes these things don't show up till later, because in many inhalation cases, workers say, they're fine at first, and then things get worse even hours later. So why do some of the most serious respiratory injuries show up way after the exposure?
Certain chemicals do cause slow building inflammation, which leads to fluid in your lungs. And you might feel okay right now, but hours later and even days later, your breathing can become labored. And that's why even mild exposures always need medical follow-up.
Well, when a release happens, communication across the site can break down quickly. What issues do you see with alarms, instructions, or confusion about where workers are supposed to go?
Well, and not always, but alarms on occasion will go off too often. That leads to you kind of ignoring that alarm. Well, we hear it every day, so let's just keep on moving and get the job done. Radio traffic becomes chaotic, and you really can't understand who's messaging who's speaking to who. And people sometimes will head the wrong way because of wind direction, going downwind of whatever exposure. And oftentimes there's unclear muster points, especially for a contractor. Every single facility, every single unit has different muster points to rush to safety to. So knowing all that beforehand is of utmost. Knowing where the wind's blowing is very important, especially in release cases.
Some releases happen during routine tasks like opening equipment, draining lines, or breaking flanges. What tends to go wrong during those moments that lead to sudden exposure?
Usually it's things like incomplete purging of a unit or of a line that you're about to be working on. Leftover product remains within those lines, or opening something that was never fully depressurized. So that's extremely important. So assumptions replace careful checks when things are moving fast. You have to avoid it, and you have to make sure everything's locked out, tagged out, and everything's purged through the lines.
So after an inhalation injury, what information becomes important in determining how the release started, things like maintenance records, testing logs, or contractor reports?
Oh yes, obviously maintenance records, the log out, tag out paperwork, gas monitoring logs. Have they had all these leaks out there ongoing? How long has it been ongoing? Being able to understand the permitting process and what was cleared and what wasn't cleared is important. Uh, and process data from right before the event is extremely important. That lets us know what product is flowing, and then we get to know what product was released. All of that put together actually helps us paint the picture and have a greater understanding in and out of court.
Well, you've handled cases where multiple workers were exposed at the same time. So, what typically creates those cluster events where several crews are affected before anyone realizes what's happening?
That's oftentimes seen whenever work is happening and conjoining units or connected systems or a release that drifts into an area where multiple crews may be working. So a release over here affects everybody over here. So it's basically everybody. Even though you do everything right in your unit, doesn't mean everybody is doing everything right in the next unit. And that's why the cohesion and having the knowledge of what's going on around you is so important as well.
Sounds like communication is key as well, too.
It is.
Well, many workers push through breathing problems because they don't want to leave the job. So, how can ignoring early symptoms make both that injury and the legal case more complicated?
Ignoring exposure is going to lead to delayed treatment. So depending on the severity of your exposure, it can be absolutely catastrophic for the worker. It can also create some legal problems. It can muddy up the causation. I mean, a jury and a court's going to expect if you're injured, you're going to report it. It's they don't really try to look at the nuances. It's kind of cut and dried at the courthouse.
Well, for someone who works around tanks, lines, or units every day, what's one practical thing they can pay attention to that helps them catch a dangerous release before it turns into an emergency?
Stay tuned in to the changes around you in your area, new smells, weird pressure readings, or even staining around different flanges, and so trust those cues and report them right away instead of assuming everything's normal. I mean, it's basically it's eyes open, paying attention to your coworkers and to the unit and the processes around you.
Well, thank you so much, Brooks, for breaking this down for us today.
Thank you, Shameika.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Refinery Injury Podcast with Brooks Harrison. If you or someone you love has suffered an inhalation injury from a gas release or toxic smoke event, visit refineryinjury.com to learn more about your options and how Brooks and his team can help. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss the next episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.